As some of you know, I don't do YouTube full time. I'm a full-time lawyer who does YouTube as a sort of, let's call it a passion side hustle. And you might be wondering what a lot of people close to me wonder and have asked me before, which is how do you do everything that you do? How do you script, film, edit, and upload a video every single week and a short every single day while working full-time on a career that is stressful and time-consuming, while training jujitsu 2 to 4 times a week, while lifting weights 4 to 5 times a week, and while still being able to nourish my relationships with my lovely fiance and my friends and my dog? Well, that's what I'm going to tell you about in this video, and I've broken it down to 10 different things. The first is that I plan my weeks and months ahead of time. Now I'm old school, so I like to use a paper calendar, but I also use a digital calendar as well. And so what I do is I use a 2-tier system where everything gets included in the digital calendar, sometimes by the staff on our department at the law firm, and then everything also gets included on the paper calendar. That way, if one of the 2 calendars fails, I know I have the backup of the other calendar. In other words, I'm less stressed because I know if it's in neither calendar, then it's probably not a thing. Now, I only use this calendar for deadlines, so this calendar is only for the month-to-month view. As far as the week-to-week view, I have a routine on Sunday evenings where I plan my week ahead of time. This allows me to go into the week already prepared and not waking up on Monday morning, strolling into work at 9 a.m. and trying to figure out my week while I have 17 different things coming at me. And then on the day-to-day, I try to every single evening go over the plan that I set for myself that week and update it as things have come up throughout the week. Because oftentimes the plan that you set for the beginning of the week changes as the week goes on. And so every evening I cross out things that have been completed and I change things around if things need to be changed around. Another thing that this allows me to do is that it allows me to plan my content ahead of time. So when I plan my week ahead of time, I know in advance which days are light work days that I can focus more on my content. Which brings me to the second item, which is that I try as hard as possible to work on one thing at a time. So for example, when I work on content, I'm not working on my cases as a lawyer. And when I'm working on my cases, I'm not working on content. Furthermore, when I'm working on cases, I try to work on one case at a time. And similarly, on the content side, I try to batch my work as well. So I try to come up with multiple ideas for multiple videos all at once. Then I try to script multiple videos all at once. And then I try to film multiple videos all at once. That kind of batching helps me stay focused on the task at hand, and it helps keep me from becoming overwhelmed from trying to do a bunch of different things at once. And it also improves the quality of my work because I know that I'm just focused on that specific task, and so I can devote my entire mental resources to that task or to that type of task. Third thing that I do is that I communicate well with my coworkers. Many of them know that I do this, and to be honest, I'm very blessed to be working at the place that I'm working in right now because they are very understanding of my desire to do something like this, and I get to work from home and I get to basically choose my own hours. Obviously, you know, everybody works a 9 to 5 essentially, so you do have to be available because you're working with other people and you can't just disappear, but there is a lot of leeway in how you can create your own schedule and how you use your own hours. So that is definitely a massive plus. But back when I didn't have that and I used to have an office job, I would wake up early in the morning to do this kind of work before work because I know myself and I know that when I come home from work in the evening, it is very, very hard for me to get anything done. So I took the initiative of getting up earlier and doing this kind of work before work. The fourth thing I do is that just as I have a multi-layered planner system, I also have a multi-layered to-do list system. And the way that this works is that I put everything that I have to do for everything: work, content, personal stuff. I just bought a house, so house stuff, I'm getting married, so wedding stuff. I put it all on one piece of paper and I delineate, okay, this is the wedding stuff, this is the house stuff, this is the work stuff, this is the content stuff. And then when I plan my weeks and my days, I take from that master to-do list, so to speak, and I create smaller to-do lists for the week and for the day. Another thing that I do is that I always write things down the moment that it comes to me because I know that I might forget it literally 20 seconds later. And so if I have something come up in my mind and I go, oh, I have to do this, I make sure to write it down somewhere, whether it's a sticky note, and then from that sticky note or from that piece of paper, I know that it will eventually make its way to the to-do lists and it won't fall through the cracks. But the way it falls through the cracks is if it comes into my head and I don't write it down. So I have a location on my desk where it has a bunch of sticky notes, a bunch of notes, And then every week I go through those and I move them to the bigger to-do list. And then from that bigger to-do list, I move that to the weekly and daily to-do lists. Another thing I do that goes in tangent with this is that I set alarms. And the reason I set alarms is to, number one, on a day-to-day basis, to remind me to do something. For example, if something has to get done by the end of the day and I need to follow up with somebody, but I can't follow up with them right now because it's only 10 in the morning, I have to follow up with them at 4 p.m. For example, I set an alarm at 4 p.m. to remind me to do it. But I don't just use alarms for that. If something comes into my mind and I'm not at my desk or somewhere where I can write it down, I will literally write it into an alarm and set the alarm for a time that I know that I'm going to be at or near my desk. And so once that alarm goes off, I move that item onto the sticky note or the piece of paper, which will eventually make its way onto the to-do lists. Now, I will say that this method of sticky notes and papers and alarms, while it's great for certain things, it is great on a limited basis, because if you let it get out of control and you have sticky notes everywhere and you have 17 alarms and you have 17 different pieces of paper, you are going to get ridiculously overwhelmed. And so that is how I know if I need to reset and get it together, because if I have all these alarms and all these sticky notes, I know that there's something that's going wrong because they're not making their way onto the to-do list. And or I have so many sticky notes and so many alarms that I'm failing to plan my weeks ahead of time. And so that's actually a pretty good measure of how well I'm doing managing my time, is to see how many sticky notes and how many alarms I'm having at once. Now, a seventh thing I rely on are Google Docs and Google Sheets. Now, this is something I primarily rely on for my content, because for lawyering, I tend to rely mostly on lists, like to-do lists, like I just discussed, or follow-up lists, which I will discuss in a second, but I use Google Docs primarily for content ideas and for the actual video scripts themselves. And within that Google Doc, I have yet another system, which is a table for each video and each content idea that I have that delineates the important parts of that video, like the title, the thumbnail, the hook, the structure, and the call to action. And so I have that for every single video. So if I'm out of the house and I get an idea and I want to write it down, I can write it down in the exact place that I think fits best. For example, this idea fits best as a hook for this video that I thought of yesterday. Same thing with Google Sheets, although I use that more so for my content schedule, and that's not really something that I'm doing while I'm out on the road. But it's nice to know that I can access it if I in fact do come up with some idea that somehow ends up in the content schedule table while I'm not at home. An eighth thing that I do is that I have a list of follow-up items. In other words, items that don't necessarily need me to work on them, but I have to follow up on them. I actually have a system in my Outlook. I won't get into it because it's very specific to lawyering, but basically every case gets its own subfolder, and then every one of those subfolders gets specific subfolders that, again, I won't get into because they're specific to lawyering. But the system that I have for Outlook, I also have for my Gmail, which is a system of having 0 unread emails as much as possible, or as close to 0 as often as possible. So what that system entails is that if an email comes in, it either gets dealt with right away, or if it requires follow-up later, or if I'm going to do it later because I can't get to it right now, it either goes on a piece of paper or the email gets marked as unread, so I know to go back to it at a later date. That way I don't look at something, say, yeah, I'll get to it later, and then the email gets lost into oblivion and it doesn't get written down anywhere, and then it never gets done. And so it either gets put on a piece of paper, it either gets marked as unread, or it gets moved to one of the subfolders and also marked as unread. But at least there, it's marked as unread in a categorized way. I do the same thing with my personal email, but just without the subfolder structure. So it's either not something that needs to be dealt with at all, it gets dealt with right away, or it gets put on a piece of paper, or the email gets marked as unread. With that system, I feel confident that important things are not going to fall through, which reduces the level of overwhelm and anxiety that I feel on a daily basis, which allows me to do more. The ninth thing that I do is that I've actually been able to make good use of my evenings. Like I mentioned before, when I'm done with work, it is very hard for me to want to do anything other than just relax. But I have found that not only are most jujitsu classes in the evening, or at least the ones that are attended to most often by people, but the jujitsu culture has a level of accountability where your jujitsu training partners know if you've been showing up to classes or not. And so that accountability helps me push past that evening fatigue and show up to my jujitsu classes. And honestly, every single time I do it, I feel way better for having attended. And most of the time that I don't do it, I feel worse for not having attended. So that's a way that I use social accountability for my benefit. Another way that I use accountability for my benefit is with weight training and running. I have a friend named Corey. Shout out Corey. Everybody shout out Corey in the comments, please. It would be fantastic. But I have an ongoing competition an ongoing Apple Watch competition with Corey. They each last about a week, but it's a competition based on basically a point system based on calories burned, minutes exercised, and just overall healthy living. And so I know that if I don't lift my weights, Corey will beat me, and I cannot have Corey beat me. So I guess that's not really so much using social accountability, but using a little bit of competition to keep me on track. And finally, the 10th thing is that me and my fiance are religious when it comes to our Friday night date nights and our church and brunch Sundays. We don't like to miss date night and we don't like to miss church. And so because we both don't want to miss those things, we almost always do those things without fail. And so that's a form of social accountability from one to the other. But that accountability wouldn't be there if we didn't appreciate how important those two things are for not just ourselves, but for our relationship as well. Now, one thing I didn't mention outside of nutrition and sleep routines and a lot of other things that I'm gonna cover in future videos is that the number one thing that keeps everything glued together for me is waking up at 6 every single day and going through the same 1-ish hour morning routine. If you want to know more about that, I made a video that you can check out right here about my 6 a.m. morning routine. And as always, if you enjoy this kind of content and you want to see more of it, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and click the link in the description box below where you can sign up for my weekly email newsletter where I send you content like this every week, every Monday via email to get you started for the week. Other than that, I'll see you in the next video.